And today I'm going to be talking to you about Germany after World War One. The reason we're talking about Germany after World War One is because what occurs here is going to have a direct effect on the rest of the world through World War Two. So, in other words, what happens in Germany is going to directly lead to World War Two, and World War Two is still having a very, very real effect on the rest of the world. In order to understand what happens, we're going to look at the rise of the Nazis, a political party in Germany, and a new term called fascism, and why it might appeal to people. So, in order to do this, we are going to look at a few things. First of all, what happens to Germany after World War One, including its problems. The period of time in Germany after World War One is called the Weimar Republic. Okay, it lasts for about 12 years, from 1919 to 1931. It officially ends in 1933, so we could say it lasts about 14 years. Then we're going to look at what fascism is, why it appeals to people, especially during difficult times. We're going to look at the rise of fascists like Hitler and the Nazi Party, and then we're going to look at how fascism actually works and why information and education are so important to fascism. So, first of all, in Germany after World War One, you have the Treaty of Versailles, which was 1919. In order to understand this, we have to remember that Germany lost the war technically, but the way they lost was an armistice, which meant people just stopped fighting. The problem was Germany was really the only big player left in the Central Powers. Austria-Hungary had pretty much been wiped out. The Ottoman Empire was the same. So Germany was kind of the last big fighter left. Then you had France, Britain, the United States, and pretty much the rest of the world who was very mad that World War One had just happened. So Germany would end up taking the blame for pretty much all of World War One. You may or may not, agree with that based on your own research. But here are a few things from the Treaty of Versailles. Germany had to pay reparations, which meant they had to pay for basically everything. The German military was dismantled, which had kind of a demoralizing effect on a lot of Germans, especially the military. Germany lost a bunch of territory, which meant that a lot of Germans were now in other countries. And that also meant that some of the richest land in Germany, where they would be able to make money, was also taken away from Germany. And lastly, this meant that Germany was economically isolated. Germans basically couldn't participate in the rest of the world economy, which made it difficult for Germany's economy to recover. Just for some perspective on lost territory, here Germany lost a bunch of territory to Poland in the east, and in fact, Germany now had like two different countries. They were the same country, but East Prussia was geographically separated from the rest of Germany, which was a very odd situation and made a lot of Germans mad. You also had this area ceded to France, known as Alsace and Lorraine. This was originally taken from France about 50 years earlier. And then later in the 1920s, during a period called hyperinflation, which we'll talk about in a sec, Germany lost even more territory, and the territory they lost had a bunch of coal in it. Now, here are some of the German reactions after World War One. First of all, Germans felt kind of isolated. It's like they were treated like they had been the bully in World War One, and they couldn't play nice with the rest of the world, and so now they're isolated. So this is true. I mean, the British, the French, and even the Americans treated Germany after World War One as kind of this bad kid that needed to be disciplined. Germans also felt stabbed in the back because they had actually done really, really well as a military during World War One. Remember that Germany was basically single-handedly for a long part of the war fighting off the French, the British, later the Italians, and the Americans. It also was kind of odd because the Germans basically didn't understand what was going on in World War One until the war had ended. It was difficult to understand what was happening on the front lines, and as far as the Germans knew, they were doing fine in the war. So the Treaty of Versailles was kind of a shock. So during the 1920s, Remember, this is the same period of time when the United States economy is doing really, really well. The French and the British economies are recovering. The German economy is going to be doing terribly because they have to pay all these reparations. And the German political system is going to be kind of a mess. Now, let's take a look at that German political system. Um, After World War I, because Germans are so mad, they demand that Wilhelm II abdicates the throne. So Wilhelm was the dictator. Everybody was mad at him. He basically had to get out of there. Uh, the Germans then, with the encouragement of the rest of the world, established a democracy, and this was called the Weimar Republic. It lasts about 14 years. The problem is this new government in Germany is really, really complicated. You could pause the lecture and try and break down how this economy works, or excuse me, how this political system works. Um, I bet you'll have a hard time trying to figure out just how a bill gets passed. Um, Basically, I'm showing you this to understand that there were lots of different moving parts in this government, and it was a big change from the previous German government, which was basically do what Wilhelm II asks you to do. So some strengths in this government is that for the first time, Germany is much more democratic, so people have a say in what's going on in the government much more than they did before. You also have a lot of rights being protected. Ethnic minorities were protected. There was social welfare, so people had like job security, or were supposed to have job security and social security. The problem is this government is really complicated. Another problem is that the president is supposed to have the confidence of the military, which is almost, um, responding directly to the president. But most of the military was held over from the World War I era, and were not really loyal to this new government. They were still loyal to the old government, which they thought shouldn't have lost the war in the first place. So the military was kind of resentful of this new president and this new government. Now, the way this government worked is the reason why it was so complicated. So let me just give you an idea of how this would work. The president is elected by the people. The parliament, known as the Reichstag, is kind of like the American Congress. So the Reichstag really makes the laws, and they're elected by the people as well. The chancellor is going to be the leader of the party with the most votes. So already you have a couple people, and it's not really clear who is the actual leader of the country. What makes it even more complicated is that you had a bunch of different political parties in Germany at this time, and depending on what percentage of the vote that political party got, they got that percentage of seats in parliament. So if there are 100 seats and your party gets 30% of the vote, you get 30 seats. If you get 3% of the vote, you get 3 seats. This is different than the United States Congress, and it causes a lot of problems, because what if that 3% is actually crazy and it elects somebody who's extremely nationalistic and militaristic and violent and racist and sexist? Those elected officials are still in parliament making trouble for everybody. So what this means is that you have lots of different political parties in parliament, and they all want different things, and it's hard to get anything done. Plus, you have something else that happens during the Weimar Republic called hyperinflation. So after World War I, the economy is moving really, really slow in the Weimar Republic. Um, it's hard to get anything done because a lot of money is moving out of Germany, and it's also hard to get things done because the Weimar Republic is complicated and isn't making good decisions quickly enough. So, what the Weimar Republic tries to do in order to increase jobs and increase business and just allow people to have some kind of a way to make money is they take loans from the U.S. instead of raising taxes, and then they print a bunch of money without resources to back it up. So just for a second, let's say that there's $100 in the German economy. And let's say there are 100 bushels of wheat. Okay, so each bushel of wheat could cost $1. If you print now a bunch of money. So now there's $300 in the German economy. Each bushel of wheat now costs $3, but the value hasn't changed. There's still only one bushel of wheat. Okay? So in other words, the real value of like physical things hasn't changed, but more money is being printed. Okay? Now, this leads to something called inflation, which means that there is more currency in the economy, but there's the same amount of goods. Okay? So if you had saved money, if you had, let's say, $50 in the bank, suddenly that $50 is worth less, which means you can buy less, even though there are the same amount of goods or physical things in the economy. Now that means that people who own things rather than money tend to do well in this economy, which were the rich people in the first place. So most people who had lost a lot during World War I, if they had saved any money, suddenly their money was worthless. The German solution, the German government's solution to this was just to print more money. Okay, so before World War I, the mark, which was the German dollar, was worth about $4. Excuse me, 4 marks was worth $1. After 1923, suddenly, because of all the printing of money, marks were worth. Now let me try and get this number right. I can't get the number right. So let's think of it as an increase of 1 quadrillion. Okay, that basically means that the German money was completely worthless. Here's a photo of a guy basically sweeping money off the street. It's completely worthless at this point, which means that if there's no currency, the only currency that works is either foreign currency like US dollars or basically trading goods like food or metals. And the problem is the entire economy is going to shut down without currency. We've learned about how you need currency to operate in a capitalist system. Well, if you don't have currency, suddenly you basically can just barter. And Germany didn't have a lot to barter anyways because World War I had destroyed so much of the country. So here's a quick video on hyperinflation, and then we're going to end this video lecture, give you a chance to think about what you just saw, and then we'll see how the Nazi Party actually comes to power. Whoops. Let's get this video going.
World War I lasted from 1914 until 1918. In the end, much of Europe was in ruin. The Allies had triumphed and Germany had been defeated, and it was time for payback. The Allies, though America objected, presented the German government with a bill for 132 billion gold marks. That's billion with a B. It was twice Germany's annual income. Desperate, facing a bill they didn't have the money to pay, the Germans did just what America's Continental Congress did in 1777. They fired up the printing press and pumped out the paper. At the end of the war, $1 would buy roughly 4 marks. 5 years later, $1 would buy 4.2 trillion marks. That's trillion with a T.
So just for a second, let's think about why would you print money? The idea is that if people suddenly have money in their pockets, then they're more willing to actually go out and buy things, right? This is completely this is psychology. That's all it is. The idea is that if you have like some kind of thing that can purchase goods, you might go out and try and purchase goods, which means that people will sell goods, which means they'll make things, which means that the economy will basically start up. So the idea is that you print currency and then the economy will move. Okay, so let's continue this video.
Ordinary citizens suffered the most. Germany's birth rate fell and the death rate rose. Infant mortality climbed by 21%, and on the black market, cigarettes became the new money. The government's money was so worthless, a whole wheelbarrow of it couldn't buy a loaf of bread. You might as well use it for wallpaper or for kindling. By 1930, all that crazy, out-of-control printing of money had destroyed the economy of Germany.